very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org radio with Global Alert News edition for April 9th, 2016. This show is broadcast on KQMS in Northern California Saturday mornings. For the internet listeners that don't realize that, we have a large reach in Northern California. This show is commercial-free, 1 hour of commercial-free, hard-hitting, important news updates, news you won't hear in most places. And we can say what we want because we have no commercials again, no sponsors to tell us what we can or can't say on this program. And every week, where does one start in the task of trying to sound the alarm when the walls are closing in on so many fronts that a 1 hour show, even without commercials, can barely scratch the surface of what needs to be said, what needs to be told? The darker the horizon grows, the deeper into denial most people are going. This is unfortunate, but it's a fact. This is a recipe for total cataclysm. We're already there on so many fronts. Will a wake-up occur in time to salvage anything? Time will tell. Again, trouble's not off over the horizon somewhere, over the next ridge. It's kicking the door in right now. And even now, I'm truly amazed at the apathy of most people, the unwillingness of most people to look up, look around, and see what's happening around them, to see how rapidly the implosion on so many fronts is occurring, from environmental, economic, atmospheric. Again, it's coming from every direction, and still so many are sleeping. If you're distracted by the ever more ridiculous political theater, and it's absurdly ridiculous, you're truly missing the big picture. If any candidate was really a threat to those in power, that candidate would already be dead. That's a fact. How long did it take those in power to kill Kennedy? How long? A week after he said something that they found threatening? He was dead in a week. Paul Wellstone, for those who don't know who he is, he was the last truly stand-up elected official in this country for the most part. His whole family was taken out. Look up Paul Wellstone and read the story about him and what happened to him when he refused to toe the line for the power structure. If you've ever seen the big playoff games, the championship games, World Series, and so forth, have you ever wondered why all those games almost always go till the very last round? Why is that? Is that just a miraculous coincidence that they get to play out every game to maximize the distraction? Distractions and orchestrations. The election is in the same category. Carefully orchestrated theater, very convincing, but in the end, the human race continues to hurtle toward the abyss. As I've stated on previous shows, again, anyone looking from the outside at the human race right now, any intelligent life form, I'm not saying there is one, I'm just saying if there is, how could you not come to the conclusion that our species is again bent on its own suicide? It's hopelessly distracted with elections and iPhones, while the ecosystems in the biosphere on which their lives depend are virtually collapsing. I can only hope this paradigm changes, and I will certainly try to do everything I can to sound the alarm, and I'm very grateful to all those that are truly dedicated to that mission of sounding the alarm, of reaching critical mass. And that's the only way forward, by the way, to reach critical mass. For those who don't yet get that, for those who think, again, they can just sign a petition or watch a presentation once a year and they've done their part, that's not enough. It's not even close. That doesn't move the ball forward. You have to get in the game. You have to actually help with the battle at hand. How about all the organizations and charities that claim to be trying to find a cure, for example, for everything from cancer to Alzheimer's to world hunger, while at the same time our entire society turns two blind eyes to the total destruction occurring on our planet that I just mentioned from countless sources, with climate engineering being at the top of the list. Every breath we take is contaminated with the fallout from global climate engineering. It's killing everything, by the way. I mean, I'll get into that a little further on into this program and try to lay that out in a little more descriptive form. But while all this is going on, we have these organizations that, again, claim to be going to cure everything, and yet ignoring the major causal factor in so many fronts. Isn't this a bit like one hand claiming to be committed to, for example, finding a cure for gunshot wounds, while the other hand is shooting every living thing on the planet? Does that make sense? It makes no sense. This is the society we live in. It has to change, or we won't be around much longer. That's a mathematical fact. In regard to health, I apologize in the last two shows that I wanted to go into further the various protocols that I've used for myself that I believe are very helpful and could benefit others. I'm not recommending anybody do what I do, but I want to explain what I do, and you can choose to do what you want. I didn't really have time. I cut myself short in the last two shows. I'm going to write it down in an article so it's clear, so I'm not rushed. I get too caught up on the rest of the news, and I cut myself short twice. I apologize. Before I get on to headlines, what's happening with our totally engineered, totally unnatural, and increasingly destructive weather, I want to mention a congressional candidate named Jeffrey Gerlich. Jeffrey can be found at jeffreygerlichforcongress.org. That's JEFFREY GERLACH forcongress.org. Jeffrey's a very intelligent, articulate individual. I've taken the time to meet with him because he is willing to face the geoengineering issue. Haven't seen anybody else with that kind of courage. Certainly didn't see Doug Lamalfa or his staff with that kind of courage. In fact, initially, they were very concerned about the issue until apparently someone said no. So even with test data, UV metering demonstrated for Congressman Lamalfa at his office with his staff by a 20-year metering expert, everything gets ignored. Test data from Cal EPA gets ignored. Everything's ignored, and we were accused of not even presenting the data to begin with. That's the kind of quote-unquote elected officials we have. We don't need that. I hope people take a good hard look at jeffreygerlichforcongress.org. Quite impressed with him, and I want to try to help him gain the exposure he needs to make his voice heard. Now, I want to go over the ever more unnatural and engineered weather. It's becoming absurdly ridiculous. Again, as I mentioned, I believe I may have mentioned last week, but we had snow in Guadalupe Island in the Caribbean at about 50 to 60 degrees. I believe the flakes started falling there according to reports. Why does it snow at that temperature? Why is it snowing on Guadalupe Island when it's 95 degrees in Northern California? When the Arctic, on December 25th, the North Pole was above freezing and raining. Think about this. December 25th, it was raining at 40 degrees at the North Pole, and somehow it's snowing in April in Guadalupe Island in the Caribbean? Think about that. When does reason kick into the equation? The engineered storms that we have happening every week, there's an engineered storm that has a name every week, like it's some sort of scheduled commuter train. It's absurd. The world we live in has become completely absurd. We're living in an insane asylum, and that's no joke, because we have a population that's willing to go along with that so far. So now we have, again, the warm side of the storm, the cold side of the storm. We have temperatures rebounding, whiplashing up and down, record highs to record lows. We have crops being devastated from the chemical ice nucleation. And again, that's how these cool downs occurred. When they have enough moisture, it can be chemically nucleated to cool down the surface. A layer of dense air on the surface can create chemically nucleated snow. And that's why we have so much thunder snow. Think back a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, and before that, thunder snow was unheard of. Now it's the norm. Now ice storms are the norm because often these chemically nucleated materials are hitting the surface before they set up, if you will. So reason should kick in again. You shouldn't have 80 degrees tornadoes and thunder showers on one side of a, quote, winter storm and snow falling at often 40 degrees on the other side. This is as ridiculous as it can get. These events are engineered top to bottom, and people fighting geoengineering should get that through their heads. These cool downs are engineered. So don't consider them natural, because when you do consider them natural, you're simply towing the narrative that the climate engineers want you to tow. To pretend what they're doing is somehow natural. And in regard to the state of the climate, I'm still ever more amazed at how many people try to believe that industrial civilization has not harmed the planet. I don't know how you come to such a conclusion. Again, it's like running someone over in a crosswalk and claiming they died of a heart attack. That's not rational. We've decimated the planet. Climate engineering is at the top of that list. Now, I'll get into a little more weather events later, a little more particular data. I want to go over some headlines because the walls are closing in from every front, and I want to give some outline of that before we get to more specifics. Here's some headlines from around the globe. Global profits recession leaves investors with nowhere to hide. When you've exploited the whole planet, at some point you run out of options. Industrialized civilization has ground up nature for profit, and as I've stated in so many shows before, when nature implodes, the facade of the perpetual growth industrialized society will follow. And that's happening. It's being hidden to some degree right now because of the artificially inflated stock market number. That won't last for much longer. Wait and see. Here's another one. Climate change puts trillions of dollars of financial assets at risk. Now, with these types of titles, one, you can't really discuss climate change without discussing climate engineering, first of all, because weather warfare is decimating the globe. How many traffic accidents have happened in the nucleated snowstorms? How many people have died of respiratory mortality from climate engineering? Was that a factor in Merle Haggard's death? Those that know, he died a few days ago. As I published, I met with Merle for 3 hours not so long ago at the request of his attorney, because Merle knows about climate engineering, absolutely knows about it, and extremely concerned about it. And yes, he died of a respiratory-related ailment, as a lot of other people have, but when we look at the bigger picture, when we know we've seen respiratory mortality in the continental U.S. go from 8th on the list of mortality to 3rd in 5 years, from 2005 to 2010, something's radically wrong. Something's in the air. How many commercials do we see? Every other commercial is an asthma, allergy commercial. Every other one, and it doesn't matter what time of year it is. It doesn't matter. COPD, you name it. It's like we should assume we should have a breathing problem, and we should assume that we're all going to get Alzheimer's and dementia. To watch the media, you would assume so. Because they want us to think all this is normal. It's not normal at all. So when we see a report coming out, and I'll get to a more specific on this later in this show, that about climate change, its effect on assets, for example, in this case, when the planet's dead, there are no assets. Nobody has any assets, and the only true asset is a natural asset. Printed money is not really an asset. You can't eat it, can you? You can't heat with it. It's not going to keep you warm. It's not going to keep you dry. It's simply a facade. So the notion that climate change puts assets at risk, it makes assets, in fact, completely meaningless. And climate engineering is making quote-unquote climate change exponentially worse, not better. Another headline, global steel industry facing ice age, quote, ice age, top China mill warns. In other words, the industrial machine is screeching to a halt. Don't let the fake stock market number fool you. Screeching to a halt. And by the way, let me backtrack a minute on the term ice age. With the snow in Guadalupe Island, the websites like Ice Age Now, jumping up and down about the ice age is going to start any day. Really? because some chemically nucleated snow fell on a tropical island in order to create a headline, that means the ice age is going to start? How about we just had the warmest March ever recorded since 1880? How about February, the warmest month ever recorded since 1880 in history on planet Earth? How about January of 2016? Also, the warmest January ever recorded since record keeping began. How about the last 5 years on planet Earth? Another record, warmest 5 years ever recorded. How about 2015, warmest year ever recorded, beating out 2014, which was the warmest year ever recorded, and 2016 is expected to beat 2015. How about 370 months in a row of above normal global temperatures? How about 40 years in a row of above normal global temperatures? The planet's in total meltdown. I could go on and on and on and on, and I know these figures off the top of my head because this is all I do, is study this issue inside and out. And again, those people that are stuck on Al Gore and carbon credits, get over it. Get over it. It's not about Al Gore. Al Gore's an idiot. Get over Al Gore. Start looking at facts. Start figuring out what's really going on around you. Because the only way we're going to stop climate engineering is to stand on factual data, to understand what's happening with the planet, to understand that the planet's in meltdown and climate engineering is making it worse. And by standing on credible data, we may at some point get the completely cowardly climate science community to come out of their corner, admit to geoengineering, and help us to stop it. But we're not going to get them out of the corner if they feel the anti-geoengineering community is completely out to lunch on the state of the planet, while the planet's burning to the ground, literally, record temperatures everywhere, with the Weather Channel trying to cover it up with their winter weather theater. But we have to stand on solid ground if we're going to build bridges with those we need to connect with in order to form the alliances necessary to reach critical mass, expose this issue, and stop it once and for all. If you're not studying data on a regular basis, if you're marching forward on ideology and preconception, you're on the wrong path. Correct your compass heading, please, if you really want to help in the battle. Another headline. New York Fed president refuses a question about gold swaps in public. It's interesting to me how many people don't know what the Fed is. That they think it's some kind of government authorized, run by elected officials institution. It's private bankers. Private bankers run the world. People ask me all the time, who's behind this? Who's funding it? Are they using our tax dollars? They don't care about our tax dollars at all. That's a facade too. It's just designed to keep you struggling and in the trench because they're printing whatever money they want. But that's changing because countries around the globe have had enough of the empire. They're disconnecting from the dollar, and that makes the empire more dangerous than ever. So for those who don't understand the money system, how it works, that we have private bankers literally running the world because they are allowed to print whatever money they want, investigate. Investigate that issue as well. Find out what's going on. Find out how completely criminal and fraudulent the entire monetary system is. Another headline. Canada's ever-shrinking oil industry braces for more job cuts. Industrial machine is screeching to a halt. The delusion of perpetual growth on a finite planet with finite resources is beginning to shatter. There's no stopping it. It's coming. The question now is, can we stop the machine from grinding up what's left of nature in time to salvage any part of Earth's life support systems? And I fully realize how many people roll their eyes and walk away and try to marginalize everything I'm saying without a shred of fact to back up their opinions because they don't want to hear it. Nobody wants to hear bad news. I don't want to do what I'm doing now. I never, ever wanted this job. But I can't look the other way. I can't. I've never been able to look the other way. So don't do something halfway. If you're going to help, if you're going to jump into this fight and try to help, do it in earnest with all your effort, not halfway. Next headline. Report, worldwide military spending reaches $1.7 trillion. Another sign of the human race's insanity and their bent toward suicidal tendencies. As the world is imploding, as the biosphere is imploding, literally, we are spending every bit of resource we have on building bigger weapons of mass destruction. How can this not be seen as total suicidal tendency? Bracing for war. And how many people are willing to support that? How many people are buying into the whole orchestrated refugee crisis, which of course was created by bombing out these countries, destroying their infrastructure, making sure the refugees would happen, wars of total aggression, which our country not only participated in, but instigated in many cases, our military being used for this. And this is where I appeal to our military brothers and sisters. You have a responsibility not just to follow orders, but to do what's right, to fulfill your oath to protect the Constitution and your citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic. I say that every week because I want it to sink in. So it's not about blind flag waving. It's about doing what's right. That's what matters. So military spending, 1.7 trillion, while the world is going down in flames, literally. Another headline. Amid climate-fueled food crisis, Filipino forces open fire on starving farmers. That's how bad it is, and it's going to get much worse. And on the Philippines, remember, Cyclone Haiyan. Remember that hurricane, the strongest landfall hurricane ever, that very anomalously strengthened right before it made landfall and devastated the Philippines? And then the U.S. was right there waiting to move in under humanitarian pretexts and then set up permanent bases. How convenient. And how many times has that happened? All over the globe. These dots are not hard to connect if you erase the preconceptions and look without bias. You must look without bias. So on with this same headline from this report. I want to read one more line from this. Police and army forces shot at about 6,000 starving farmers and Lumad indigenous people demonstrating for drought relief in the Philippines on Friday, ultimately killing 10. Observers characterized the security forces' actions as, quote, strafing starving farmers because of record drought that's now in the Philippines. And I just did an article on this for those live broadcast listeners that might not look at the website. Take a look, because these droughts are happening in strategic locations all over the globe, locations that help the military-industrial complex accomplish certain things. And it's important to remember, the climate science community has lied to us on the issue of drought being a factor with global warming. That is not true in an overall context. It's not true. It's a lie. It's a way to cover up climate engineering, because the planet should facilitate more rain on a warming scenario, not less. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. It should be raining more, and it's raining less. And the only reason it's raining less, especially in very convenient locations for the power structure, is because geoengineering is completely decimating the hydrological cycle, just like in California. So why would we not think at this point that we are not just expendable to the power structure, but a liability to the power structure? Listen to what I just said. Why would American citizens who are being droughted out, like in California, and this drought is absolutely positively a result of geoengineering, and go back and look at my presentations going back years. I said this would happen on the record again and again and again in presentations like Engineered Drought Catastrophe, Target California, a presentation that's years old. I stated exactly what would happen. And we're not out of the drought because of the biggest El Nino on record. Not at all. A few locations in valley areas have had about their normal annual rainfall, but it has not happened in the mountains. In the proper natural context, we are not seeing orographic enhancement. We're not seeing the exponential rain in the mountains. It's not happening. We are absolutely not out of the drought. The heat, the lack of humidity are already plunging us back toward the same conditions we had before this winter. So if this is happening and it's a result of geoengineering, I knew it was coming because I look at data. I'm not looking at a crystal ball. I'm looking at data. If climate engineering continued, it had to happen, and it did happen. And I presented to, again, as I've stated before, to Lieutenant Governor Newsom in his office at the Capitol. I said this would happen, Gavin. Gavin, this has to happen. And he knows this is going on. Gavin Newsom is a coward. He's a coward. The last email exchange I had with him, I think I read. And he demonstrates his cowardness. And the whole system is packed with people like this that are quite happy receiving their bonuses and contributions from the power structure and towing the line for them. So we have a system packed with cowards. We have agencies packed with cowards. We have elected officials that are cowards. And until we, the people, learn what's going on and hold the rest that are in this system that are helping to decimate our planet by going along with all this insanity. We must hold them legally and morally accountable. This starts by exposing them, and hopefully at some point we'll have Nuremberg-type trials to put these people on the stand where they belong, on trial. So back to back to the Philippines. We have starving farmers being shot at. And why, by the way, do the citizens of the Philippines allow this to happen? Why do they allow their military to shoot starving farmers? And aren't those military and police personnel also Filipinos? Have they lost all compassion? Don't we see this in every country? This is what I just talked about. If law enforcement behaves like this, if they simply shoot at whoever they're told to shoot at, even if we're talking about starving farmers, perhaps their friends or relatives or neighbors, where is honor in this? Where is virtue? There is none. The human race is truly lost at this point when this kind of thing can happen with citizens killing their own because one of them happens to be on the side of the fence where they get a paycheck and pension for pulling the trigger. How insane is this? And it's going to happen all over soon. When the shelves start to empty out in other places, it's going to get very rough very quickly, and it will come like a tornado in the night. Wait and see. Power structures doing everything they can to hide the severity of what's going on to the last possible moment. Another headline. Over 315,000 Mozambicans faced food shortages. From Africa, another one from Africa, Zimbabwe. Desperate times in Zimbabwe as El Nino food shortage ravens the nation. Again, let's blame it on something natural because we don't want to expose climate engineering. Don't want to. And that's why we have papers like the San Francisco Chronicle putting stories about the small-scale, meaningless climate engineering programs with small prop-driven planes with flares strapped to the wings in order to distract the population from the giant geoengineering elephant in the sky. And the populations are all too willing to be distracted. Another headline. South Sudan food prices soar, markets collapsing. It's coming. When there's not enough to go around, you can't hide it any longer. And the power structure will start to infight as well. It's already happening. That's a good thing. That's in our favor. Like mafia families who start to fight when there's not enough to go around, that's exactly where we're headed, and that's a good thing for us. The power structure needs to collapse very soon. Final headline. Limits to growth are on schedule. Collapse likely around 2020. It's another national headline, and again, 2020 is very optimistic. Very optimistic. I would argue the math doesn't take us to 2020. I would argue we're much, much closer. Data would indicate that the power structure could start to play big cards any time because they can't hide what's unfolding much longer. Carl Sagan made a comparison. For those who know who Carl Sagan is, he compared the global powers to a bunch of psychotic thugs in a room full of gasoline, and they all have matches. Who will throw the first match and blow the room up? And that's about the situation we find ourselves in now. And we, the people, we, the population, have participated in that because we've allowed it to happen. We've been busy with golf, football games, and iPhones, while the cancer grew and grew and grew. And now it's unimaginably huge. And so many people are a part of it, even people we know. Again, just like the police and the military in the Philippines that are shooting their own citizens who are starving. There's no morality in that. It'd be better to die of starvation or any other ailment than to abandon your honor and to engage in such an act, to shoot your own starving fellow citizens. How do these people look themselves in the mirror? Now, I spoke earlier about the studies that have just been released by our government that paint a relationship between climate change and health. Of course, they omit climate engineering, the single greatest causal factor with human health decline at this time. That's a mathematical fact. Headline, new study shows grim relationship between climate change and health. From that report, we have this. Quote, we have a pretty good idea of what climate change will do to the landscape. Melt it, flood it, tear it up, freak superstorms, turn it into a desert. But what will climate change do to us, to our bodies, and to our minds? The White House released, continuing from this report, the White House released a major report April 4th that tries to answer that question. Drawing on research from 8 federal agencies, the coming health crisis it describes is ugly and wide-ranging. An extra 11,000 premature deaths each year by 2030. From extreme heat waves, babies born too early and too small, millions of children struggling to breathe because of rising pollution, no mention of where the majority of that particular pollution is coming from, of course. Continuing with the report, allergens and wildfire smoke, the spread of mosquito-borne infections like West Nile virus and waterborne pathogens like Legionnaire's disease, food contaminated with salmonella and E. coli or leached of its nutrients, as rising carbon dioxide levels lower the concentration of protein, essential minerals in wheat, rice, potatoes, and other crops. Now, to go back through this report, what I already mentioned earlier in this program, that respiratory mortality had gone from 8th on the list to 3rd in 5 years. It's likely 2nd now. And they're talking about 11,000 premature deaths by 2030. We're already looking at hundreds of thousands of premature deaths. Millions if we look at other countries. China publicized they're losing, I believe, 4.4 million a year to respiratory ailment, and that's conservative. All of this is simply a facade. It's a complete facade. These figures are completely falsified. They don't mean anything. Just like the UV readings that we get that are completely falsified. While the UV is so intense, UV radiation, because geoengineering is shredding the ozone layer, it's burning the bark off of trees. It's doing immense damage to the planet as a whole. And we're told it's all normal. It's all just normal. Don't worry about the bark being burned off of trees. That's normal. It's not normal. Then for those who say, again, we've been over this before, but that the bark is being burned off trees in parking lots that we see in towns and cities like Reading because of the cars and the asphalt, that's a lie. That's a complete lie. Because we have the same condition in the middle of the forest. There's no parking lot or cars or windshields. Use your sense of reason. And when you see a figure like this, that such and such is going to occur by 2030, here's the mathematical fact. If we stay on this trajectory, none of us may be here by 2030. And they're talking about 11,000 premature deaths. We're adding 230 plus thousand more people to the planet every single day at this point. Now, as I said before, we've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years. How long can that trajectory continue? So don't be pacified by headlines like this that are designed to pacify you. And when they talk about rising pollution, again, not mentioning the tanker dumping 60 or 70 tons of nanoparticulates into the sky every day while everybody's hacking. Everywhere you go, people are coughing and ill health. And we're all starting to accept it as normal, like the frogs in the boiling water. Wake up. Wake up. Find some courage. Find out what's going on and sound the alarm. And don't be afraid that somebody's monitoring you. They can't monitor everybody, and the ship is going down anyway. Why would you not try to do what you can while you can? So reports like this, when the White House tries to blame, quote unquote, just climate change, tries to blame all the health issues on just that without talking about the lethal climate engineering programs, single greatest assault on the whole web of life ever launched by the human race, and they don't mention it, and they won't mention it, in spite of many claiming that they're going to throw it out in the open and legalize it. Absolutely no data to back that up. Every single maneuvering we see from the power structure is to continue to try to hide this issue as long as possible. It's up to us to expose it and stop it. It's not going to happen without us. Now, in regard to this report again and the effects of climate engineering, not just respiratory, not just the intense UV, also a huge health risk, and all these other elements listed, but fungus, as I mentioned earlier. Of the current species extinction rate, 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect per day going extinct, 15,000 times the background rate, nothing normal about that. By the way, that's 1.5 million of normal, nothing normal about that. 70 to 80% is fungally related. Fungus is killing everything from trees to bees to bats to whales to us. Fungus is a very insidious organism and very hard to get rid of. How does climate engineering connect with that? One, it's blocking direct sunlight. Two, the atmosphere is full of particles. Those are platforms on which fungus can proliferate. Three, the particles, they're bioavailable, they're toxic, they're killing beneficial organisms from the clouds to the ground. What happens when you kill all the beneficial organisms in a life form? What happens when you kill the beneficial organisms in the human body? When you take a lot of antibiotics and you kill the beneficial bacteria, fungus ensues because it takes over that empty space. Same thing is happening on a planetary scale right now. And this is assuming that biological experiment isn't a part of this equation. Why wouldn't we assume that? We have several dozen cases, publicized cases, documented cases, historical cases of the U.S. government doing biological experimentation on innocent U.S. populations. Business as usual. So, while we have a power structure, criminal elected officials, criminal media, criminal people in the science community who are lying and towing the line for the power structure and hiding programs like geoengineering, and we have all these elements contributing to hiding this massive elephant in the room of climate engineering, they're all part of the crime. They should be considered accessories. Look through reports like this that I've read. It's not so much climate change that's affecting our health at all as is the factors like climate engineering that we're not being told about. Now, what do you do when the climate science community begins to become restless and perhaps they're going to start talking? Well, first, again, as I mentioned earlier, you put a federal gag order on them. Our government's already done that to all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees. They have no First Amendment protection, and now they have a federal gag order. And now we have in places like Australia, they're simply firing the scientists. Canada's done the same. Here's a headline. If climate change is solved and beyond debate, who needs climate scientists? Question mark. That's the headline. So we have the main academic organization in Australia, it's called CSIRO, CSIRO, has announced it will axe 300 to 350 climate jobs, which will, quote, wipe out the climate division. When you don't want people to know how bad it is, when you don't want people to know geoengineering is going on, you just fire all the scientists because they're starting to get restless. They're starting to grow a conscience. It's about time. It's about time. What's our honor worth? How do so many people sell out for a paycheck and a pension? I don't get that. I really don't get that. The market industry, the grocery industry is quite a tyrannical industry. And I learned that after my career of 3 hours. 3 hours as a box boy when I was 16 years old. And I learned very quickly that the manager was going to try to put me at the bottom of the pecking order very unjustly and tried to make clear to me that I was under his thumb. I lasted 3 hours. If everybody would take a stand like that, maybe things would be different. Maybe there wouldn't be so many tyrants rising up the ladder if we just simply did not accept it. So I didn't last with Bechtel Power as well. I left at a very young age for the same reason. I couldn't stomach what I saw. Never worked for anybody since. Now, in regard to the climate science jobs that have been axed from this report, now this is a secondary report I'm reading from now because they've upped it from 350 jobs to 400. So let me continue with that report. Bureau of Meteorology offers to take over climate research. Again, the government wants their hands on everything so they can control the data. From the report again, dissent within the ranks of CSIRO is mounting, with the staff union claiming the planned job cuts are deeper than formally announced, while dozens of scientists have lodged a formal complaint against alleged bullying behavior by the chief executive, Dr. Larry Marshall. Again, someone probably like the market manager, which I quit after 3 hours, or other people I knew with Bechtel. These kind of people rise up the ladder. Same in the military. Same things happening. That's why our military is being run by, in many cases, tyrants now. A lot of good people in the U.S. military, but I hope they start standing up soon because we don't have much time. So In any event, continuing with the report, because of bullying behavior by Chief Executive Dr. Larry Marshall, the Cicero plans to cut 100 more staff than the 350 job losses formally announced in February, says the Cicero Staff Association, citing information subsequently provided by executives. Final excerpt from this report. The 450 potential job losses comprise of 100 in the land and water use, 100 in oceans and atmosphere, 70 in data, 40 in agriculture, 40 in manufacturing, 40 in mineral resources, 20 in food nutrition, 40 in research support. Sam Popovsky, the association secretary, said in the statement, across the board, cutting scientists because they don't want that data out. What did Canada do when a massive northern hemisphere ozone hole showed up? By the way, as I mentioned again, the ozone layer is decimated. People think that's only in the southern hemisphere. Absolutely not true. Northern hemisphere has a massive ozone hole. Massive. The ozone layer is decimated in both hemispheres because of climate engineering. And what did Canada do when that started to come to light? They fired their scientists that were on the ozone research team. Business as usual. Sweep it under the rug. Hide it any way you can. And again, as I mentioned already twice, gag National Weather Service and National Oceanic Administration employees. So when our reporters, and our local reporters have said this too, just like our local Mike Mangus and Mike Kruger with KRCR, who have claimed this is all some Bigfoot conspiracy theory. In regard to climate engineering, we have congressional documents, we have Senate documents, we have presidential reports, we have a list of 160 patents, we have tests from around the globe, we have film footage of these tankers sprang at altitude, we have testimony from experts from California Department of Fish and Game, Forest Service, but we have our local media doing what they're paid to do. Lying about the situation, refusing to look at data, refusing to do any honest reporting. Isn't that a crime? If we have an issue that's affecting human health in a radical way, in an irreparable way, and we have people whose job it is to expose that, to report such things to the public, and they're not doing it, whether it's a reporter or an agency official, is that not a crime? Does that not make them an accessory to the crime? If they knew about a murder, for example, and they lied to hide that, would that not make them criminally responsible? I hope we reach the point where the public wakes up and the laws are examined and their legal liabilities brought to light. I look forward to that day. So again, what we have in Australia and Canada, the firing of climate scientists because they no longer want them. Final paragraph in this report. The union has also written to the Science Minister, Christopher Payne, calling on him to, quote, suspend the cuts and begin an independent inquiry. That would be nice. Into Cicero's management, structure, and processes, because this government organization in Australia, just like all of them in America and so many other countries, criminal, absolutely criminal. And by the way, I'm communicating with a federal EPA member who has tried to bring to light the aluminum contamination that he believes is directly related to climate engineering, and he is now being investigated, pulled through the coals, and may be fired, because that's how truth tellers are treated. We know that. Again, who was sent to jail for blowing the whistle on the illegal torturing by the U.S. military? Who was sent to jail? The only one, the whistleblower. Remember that. When people ask, why wouldn't somebody speak out? People who say that don't know much about what's going on in the world. Final paragraph from this report. The cuts to Australia's premier research agency have reached 1,300 over the past 2 years, with the union particularly concerned about Dr. Marshall's behavior. Now, when you have a planet that's coming apart, you have the Great Barrier Reef. In the last 30 days, or in the next 30 days, 50% of the Great Barrier Reef will die. I talked about that on last week's show, I believe, as well. You have a climate system coming apart, and you fire all the scientists? Why would you do that? Unless you're trying to cover the tracks, unless you don't want so many people understanding what's going on and so many potential leaks in the ship. The red flags are everywhere. Let's look at another one, another headline. Yellowstone public seismographs taken offline. Why would they do that? Let's look at this report. The seismographs monitoring earthquakes around Yellowstone supervolcano have been deliberately taken offline from public view. This is a confirmed deliberate act and will stay this way. So the public is not able to see seismic activity there. Being able to see what is taking place in and around Yellowstone is of great interest to many people, because if there is a sudden flurry of earthquake activity, it could, not necessarily, but it could signal a pending eruption. Since Yellowstone is the only, quote, supervolcano on the North American continent and is very geologically active, if any eruption were to actually take place, the western two-thirds of the United States would potentially be hit with volcanic ash and severe disruption of life. The report continues. So why were the public seismographs taken offline? No one is providing the answer. Even more peculiar, the privately funded seismographs from the University of Utah are also offline to the public. We have no answer, the report states. Report continues. The images of seismographs that appeared on Superstation 95 have always come from the University of Utah, aka the UUSS. Sometime on the evening of April 4th, 2016, they suddenly got rid of those images. No one is able to archive them anymore or present them to you in the efficient fashion that you've come to know. What we can tell you so far about their changes: seismograph images have now become just a seismograph image. Every seismograph now shows only and exactly the past 24 hours of its life, as if they don't want anyone having the ability to look at its history, even 2 days later. Now, this should be of immense concern to all of us, because we've seen the same thing happen over and over. We saw this happen after Fukushima. The West Coast radiation monitoring stations were shut down. The quote-unquote safe level of radiation was raised. What about the Porter Ranch methane leak? If no one would have discovered that, they would have never told us. Never. What about the Flint, Michigan water situation? They would have never told us that. When will we wake up? And none of this could happen, by the way. Everybody always complains about the twisted, demented, criminal people at the top, and that's true. But they could never carry out all this insanity if it wasn't for a whole legion of order followers. That's what we have. Order followers everywhere. People who will do whatever they're told for a paycheck and a pension. And I'm asking some of those people, look in the mirror. Look yourself in the mirror and see what you see. Because if you're one of the order followers, you're responsible for the destruction of the future for all life if we continue on this path. Look yourself in the mirror. If you're someone in an agency and you want to start telling the truth, contact us at geoengineeringwatch.org, and you can have private, confidential consultation with one or more members from our attorneys team. It can absolutely be arranged. And the bottom line is, if not now, when? If not now, then when? We need people to step forward. We need to put a break in the dam. Once we do, by the way, there'll be no stopping the flow of truth. If we can expose climate engineering, everything else will come to the surface with it. Atrocities like 9/11. How can any rational human being look at Building 7 at 9/11 and not realize that was a demolition? How can any awake, rational human being look at the third building, and many people don't even know there was a third building? How can you not know that that was a planned demolition? How can you think that our military, the most capable in the world, couldn't find some rogue jets flying around in the most protected airspace in the world for an hour and a half? How can you possibly believe that? Wake up. How can you look up and not recognize jets spraying your skies day in, day out? When we have up-close film footage of this happening, when we have the patents, we have presidential reports, Senate reports, we have mountains of data. Turn the game off, the football game, forget the golf or the cruise to the Caribbean. Do something for your children while you can, while there's still something left to salvage. Final sentence from this report on the seismographs. After poking around to various folks involved in the University of Utah Seismic Center, one person at the facility quietly emailed us a single graphic image which gave us pause. In the image below, the green-colored line represents the border of Yellowstone National Park. The barely visible gold line represents the mouth of the supervolcano. I'll describe this picture since you can't see it on the air, obviously. It was absolutely peppered with red dots, which means seismic activity that had recently taken place at Yellowstone. Final sentence of this report. This is why the public seismographs were suddenly taken offline from the general public. That's the final sentence in the report. When something bad could happen, the power structure and all the agencies that do the bidding of the power structure do their best to hide the problem from the population. That's what they do. Don't think they're there to protect you. They're not. And I speak firsthand. I've been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento. I've spoken about all this before with high-level EPA people, told to my face that they are mandated to only look for what they're told to look for, and the rest of the samples go out the window. They don't care, and I was told this to my face, they don't care if there's depleted uranium, radioactive material in the rain. They don't care. They don't test for it, and they're not about to test for it. The system is designed to hide the problem. Now, how many of us have had friends and family tell us that we should stop worrying about the bad news or things we can't change, that we should just relax, go to Disneyland, have a good time? I want to ask you this. If your child was trapped on a raft that was hurtling down a raging river toward a waterfall and towards certain demise, would you just turn two blind eyes and go shopping or go to the movies? Is that what a truly devoted parent does? Is that the reason we're here? To have a good time? To have another Budweiser because you only go around once in life, right? I owe my life to my children, to all children, to every bird, to every frog, tree, and quite literally to every cloud in the sky that once brought clean, life-giving rain. Now, this is no longer the case. Now we all live under a toxic haze of sprayed particulates that are part of the most insane human endeavor ever launched by the governments around the globe and by the legions of order followers, again, the minions that carry out the dictates of the power structure. The insanity in question, global climate engineering, the unimaginably arrogant attempt to play God with the weather and Earth's life support systems. To be clear, I'm not referring to the small-scale weather modification programs that the criminally corrupt media, mainstream media, is now peddling as a distraction from the unimaginably larger, more destructive global geoengineering programs. Again, look up. How can anyone who is even slightly awake not see the atrocities occurring in our skies? Milky white, very seldom blue skies. So often now the weather reports call for mostly sunny skies with no natural clouds in the sky in those days. They know that days ahead of time. Mr. Kruger, our local ABC weatherman, knows that days ahead of time because he's reading a script from the National Weather Service, whose modeling is done by Raytheon, one of the largest geoengineering contractors of all. The foxes are running the hen house. So on the rain, how often now is it chance of rain, possible showers? We used to get reports that would show rain, day in, day out. No more. Yes, we get some deluges here and there, but it's very different. The weather is unimaginably different than it was years ago. How few are choosing to face that fact? Face that fact. Our lives depend on it. And if you don't think it's occurring, if you think someone would talk, again, someone would speak out, remember what I said earlier. Government scientists have no First Amendment protection, and even more critical, remember what I said earlier on this point. There is still a federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees. If you think your elected officials or media reporters, like those I've mentioned, are going to speak out, think again. All of them know just how long their leash is. They know. They're like dogs on the end of the power structure leash. Very moralist, despicable dogs in this case. Their concerns are about protecting their own personal bubbles, their own paychecks and pensions. As Mark Twain said, again, I want to repeat this one. It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just isn't so. How much do you really know about what's going on in the world? How many know where their opinions came from? How many have truly investigated their perspectives? How many have truly tried to erase their preconceptions and to form a picture of the world from the front line verifiable facts? How many have done that? How many have gone to that trouble? The human race has totally and completely lost its way. We should never yield to the denial and resistance to the truth by family and friends. to thine own self be true. Investigate what's really happening. Stand on those truths. Don't yield. Make your voice heard in the fight for the greater good. Be a part of the cure, not a part of the disease. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.